Good morning. Good morning. It is Monday, 9 a.m. So it must be Make It Happen Monday. She says, trying to get the ticker tape to go. So this channel is all about supporting you to achieve success without stress. And we share stories, strategies, but also more importantly, we ask the questions that help you to listen to that wisdom within yourself. So good morning. Today, the subject is all about confidence. We're in the week 5 of the confidence series, which I forgot to put in the show notes just now. It is episode 5. So we have covered so far. We covered confidence in episode 1. We talked about things that would people lose confidence with. And the first series subject, if you like, was decision making. So episode 2, we talk about how to make good decisions. Episode 3, we talked about planning. Or did I do it the other way around? I'm not sure. Episode 3 or 4, we've got planning and time management. And today we're going to talk about questions, asking questions and being asked questions. Because as a coach, my job is to ask my clients questions like, what would you like to have happen? Or what kind of is that? Or is there anything else about that? And what I've learned over the years is people often come to me because they have got to usually one of 3 things, and they usually need a bit of both, but either something has changed or something needs to change. And whether you're wanting to make the change happen or change is happening to you, ultimately what will happen is you have to decide what you'd like to have happen. So even if you can't have what you really want, you have to get to a point where you go, given I can't have what I want, so let's say we've lost a loved one or our marriage has come to an end and it's not what we really wanted, but it has, and that is what's happening, or maybe the business isn't as profitable as you'd like it to be, or the job isn't how you thought it was going to be. We often will get to the point where we have to do one of 2 things. We have to make a decision, and then we have to have the confidence to act on that decision. But often to get clarity and to build confidence and to understand the resources and the support that we need in order to manage the change or the impact of the change, it will often require questions. And so what I've noticed over the years, as I coach people, there's often a couple of patterns that show up. Either this sort of fear that they're not answering the question well enough. So here's a couple of things to think about. As a clean language coach, when I'm asking questions that I don't know the answer to, but I think you might. But if you're a new client, I'm getting to know you as you get to know yourself. And so I'm also learning as I'm listening what questions work for you and your system. How does your system resonate or work with things? But often people think that if they don't know the answer straight away or they're repeating the answer, then they're doing something wrong. So this is one thing I would like to sort of get across today in today's video, is that when it comes to personal development, when it comes to getting to know yourself and finding out what works for you to get clarity of what you want and what works for you to build confidence and what works for you to manage change effectively, often when we're asked questions about ourselves, we may not know the answers straight away, but the process of being asked questions sows the seed in our mind. And so if I was working with a client this week who was noticing that they were getting stuck with some studying they were doing, and they were criticizing themselves and saying that they were procrastinating. And so we were getting curious. Okay, so what happens between stuck and being unstuck? And what happens between unstuck and stuck? And it was like, well, I don't know. And of course they won't know because they haven't thought about it before, and their brain didn't know that they were supposed to track that. The brain, of course, does know that getting stuck is perhaps a bit of a challenge and a problem when you've got things you have to get done. And so it will pay attention to that because it's a problem. But often what it won't do is to work out and pay attention to what happens in between. But the focus I want to be sort of put your attention on today. Good morning, whoever's with me today. That's lovely to see you. I'm just going to comments. I just realized I can't see that. Hi, Loretta. We're just talking about questions, being asked them or asking them. is that because if your attention is, when you're being asked questions, is there's more of a sort of an awareness or a fear of not answering it correctly to please the questioner, then the likelihood is you're not going to go within and trust your own inner wisdom as quickly. You may get there. It may be on reflection, it emerges. So something to be aware of is that in order to get clarity of what we want and to have confidence in ourselves and our own process, we will need to either ask ourselves questions and or to be asked questions. Now, we can do quite a lot of self-coaching. As many of you know, I've got self-coaching guides. I've got the Tame the Time Monster and various other free resources on my website. If you go to stepbystep.listening.com and you go to work with us, there's a self-coaching pro tab, and there's ebooks and free resources there. And again, there's a few new ones I'm thinking about building. If you're interested in them, just go register and let me know that you want them, and that'll motivate me to put those as my priority. But one of the most common things is that people don't reach out for help because they're not comfortable being asked questions, and they're not comfortable being asked questions they don't know the answer to. And so in this video, I want you to be really thinking about when you're asking questions, that's like what, or when you're being asked questions, that's like what. And I remember years ago, probably 10 years ago now, working with somebody who was in the legal profession, and their job was to ask lots of questions of people. And they were often asked questions, but they were asked questions about things that they were the expert in, something that was really familiar to them and they were really confident with because they did it day in and day out, and they knew the law, and they were able to answer the questions they were asked. However, what they noticed is, and they were working with me because they were struggling with managing themselves and their team through some big changes, is that they weren't as confident asking questions of their team where they didn't really know what the answer was going to be. Whereas if they asked questions of their client and it was, to do with their particular niche in the law, it was quite predictable what the answers might or might not be. But when it came to actually asking team members questions, the answers were less predictable, and therefore they were less comfortable asking the questions. But equally, they found that they weren't very comfortable being asked questions that they didn't know the answer to when I was asking them questions about themselves. And that insight can often be the catalyst for oh, well, maybe I'm not having the really honest and helpful conversations I need to have with myself or the people around me because I'm not comfortable being asked questions I don't know the answer to. So I want you to really think about your relationship with questions and questioning. The more I've done this with people and unpacked it, quite often there is some kind of rule or a belief. Sometimes there's trauma from school where, you're asked a question in school as a youngster and you can't answer the question and people laugh and you're left with this sort of humiliation trauma in your system. And so you may have to go on a healing journey to help that part of you, that younger part of you, to recognize that that's who you were back then when you were 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 14, whatever age you were younger, and be able to speak to and listen to that younger part of you that was hurt or humiliated, and be able to change the story or the narrative that you tell yourself to sort of reassure your system that that's not who you are as an adult today. So that's one way that you can do it, and you can start to practice asking yourself questions. But the other way is to have peer support without peer pressure, learning groups where you are all collectively coming together to learn how to ask questions and be asked questions, which is typically what we do at the Do Delegate or Ditch Academy. We're a group of peer learners who are coming together, who want to get to know ourselves better, and we want to learn to ask questions and be asked questions. And so everybody is in that same situation where they understand it's not comfortable necessarily, but they are learning to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. So Loretta's put, school was hideous for me, so any negative associations. And it's really good to notice it. I call it nurturing the negative niggles. Sometimes it can be quite traumatic and we are not consciously aware of the thing that happened. And the lovely thing about coaching is you can either choose to go, actually, well, that's in my past. That's who I was then. What I'd like to have happen now is to develop a resource to be really confident asking or being asked questions. And you don't have to go back and do the healing part of it if you don't want to. That's the great beauty about coaching. But what I love about clean coaching and using clean language is it was developed from, by David Grove, using it for PTSD with Vietnam victims. And so it can be liberatingly healing, is that if you have a metaphor or a model for being asked questions that you don't know the answer to right now is like what, and you have a metaphor or a model or an experience of it, then when you get to reconnect with that and listen, and then ask yourself, given that's what it's like now, if it was just the way you'd like it to be, it'd be like what? By getting your attention on what it's like now, and then noticing what it would be like if it was just the way you'd like it to be, you take your system through it's a bit like an update when you put, your phone goes through an update or your laptop goes through an update. Your physical body goes through an update, and your brain gets this new sort of pathway created that says, oh, that's when I was 7 or 8. And yes, to have 30 people laughing at me or a teacher saying a comment when my brain was still forming, yes, that would be mortifying, and it would be horrendous, as you said, hideous. And, you can carry all sorts of stuff over from that, and it can be impacting you. But if you can't ask questions when you don't understand, if you can't ask questions to clarify what other people mean by what they say, and you can't be asked questions, then quite often we end up muddling our way through change, feeling completely under-resourced, more often than not stressed. And then we end up snapping at our, being irritable with ourselves or other people, when that bit, what's at the crux of it is actually the ability to ask or be asked questions. And I call it chatting with purpose when I work with clients, is that sometimes when I meet someone who is very new to coaching, has never done personal development questions, is really good at helping everybody outside, is all their attention's outside, and then being asked these questions that make them go within feels completely alien and it feels very uncomfortable, then I might chat by asking them questions that are a little bit lighter. Maybe they're more about, where you live and, what's going on, what's happening in your world that makes it that we're having a conversation now. So what's not working for you? And so it's almost like I'm asking questions that's much more externally referenced, and gradually, slowly, we get to that inner question where it's a bit of internal reflection. Because if you've never done that kind of reflection, it can feel very uncomfortable. It can almost feel like, I remember me having a metaphor that when I was asked questions I didn't know the answer to, or they came from a place of contempt or criticism or judgment, there was a sort of tone about them, or the speed that they were asked, or the facial expression of the person asking it. It literally felt like I was being stabbed. Now, I can't change necessarily how other people ask me a question, but what's in my control and what I've worked on over the years is to be curious about my own reaction to it and my own response. And if it is a younger version of me that's been upset in the past, I can listen to that part of me, and I can reassure that part of me. I can be the adult that child needed, and reassure and comfort that part of me in order to be much more confident to be asked questions. I still get a little bit of a feeling, a little sensation, but it doesn't throw me to the point that and sometimes I freeze because I don't have the answer. But the difference is now that because I understand how I ask questions, how I answer questions, I know my purpose for speaking and asking questions is that if I don't know the answer, I'm confident enough to go, do you know what? I don't know the answer to that. I've never thought about it. And I'm really okay with the fact that I don't know the answer to something because I've never thought about it. Or I might say, do you know what? I don't know the answer, but I know that I ought to. It's there, but I can't make the connection. Leave it with me, because I know full well that when I look at how I answer questions, some questions I just have to sleep on them. Some questions I have to wait till I'm doing that activity again before the information comes back to me. But knowing that I'm looking for that answer. So one of the things people often underestimate is that when you're working with a coach who says, what would you like to have happen? And you go, I don't know. Well, your brain will be searching for what you want to have happen. And then over the next couple of days or the next couple of weeks, in between sessions, quite often what is happening is that you're going, oh, yeah, I want that. Oh, and you catch that little thought, that little muttering of what you really want, or what you want, or what you really, really want. And you start to hear those voices, but you didn't necessarily know it back then. Or the other thing is you did know it. And I often say to people about the don't know is sometimes it's a don't know because you absolutely have no experience of it, right? You just do not know how to do it. Sometimes it's a don't know yet because you actually need time to process and you need the time for the answer to emerge. And sometimes it's, I don't know if I'm ready to hear it, or I don't know if I trust you with what I've just thought. And so it can take huge amounts of courage sometimes to admit to ourselves, when I work with clients, I work with all sorts of outcomes that people are working on. But if you're thinking about leaving your marriage and you have a really strong belief that your vows are for life, but you know that you're really unhappy, then actually saying that out loud can make it really real. And saying it out loud and knowing somebody else has heard it, also it probably won't get ignored, particularly if you've hired a coach. So sometimes you just don't know the answer, in which case the fact you now know you don't know gives you choice. You can either decide you'd like to go through the process of finding out and learning at it. If you don't know yet, then you probably know a little bit about your own learning process and how you recall information and how your memory works, in which case you'll be okay with just sleeping on it or just paying attention over the next few days or weeks and seeing if the answer emerges for you. But if you don't know yet whether you trust the other person or yourself to hear it, then it might be worth just checking in with yourself. What happens just before you trust yourself, or what happens just before you trust somebody else? Because often, I've worked with a client recently and you kind of knew what they wanted, but they weren't actually saying it. And they've done lots of preparation work. They've used the coaching sessions to build confidence, to get clarity in lots of other areas of their life. So they had a solid foundation of feeling really good about themselves. And it took almost 18 months of meetings and sessions before they actually said out loud what they really wanted. And sometimes we just don't have the courage to say it out loud. And if we're in a difficult relationship, or the business isn't going very well, or something's not happening very well in our life, often we have to invest time getting the courage and the confidence first in ourselves, in other areas of our life, in order that we can have the courage and confidence to really listen and pay attention to the answers that we have to certain questions. And so this particular person definitely invested time in their work environment and their personal relationships, friendships, and hobbies and interests, and got to the point where they felt really good about themselves in all of those areas. So then they had a solid foundation of confidence in order to have the courage to be asked and actually ask that question, answer the question honestly with what they really, really wanted. And the more they did that, the more they realized that actually what they wanted, there was another part of it that they weren't hearing. And it wasn't until they had the courage to actually listen to that part that they got the whole of the outcome out, which now means they have true clarity of what they want. And now actually doing things slowly and doing things at a reasonable pace, it actually is the right thing to do. It's not procrastinating. It's not putting off things. It's not delaying. It's absolutely the right thing to do for them right now. So I hope this has inspired you to have a think about your relationship with asking questions and being asked questions. If it's something you're struggling with, please get in touch, because we have got the doors are open to the academy, but I also work one-to-one with people, or it may just be simply an hour with me would help you to build confidence to ask yourself the question that you need to find the answer to. And so if you know that there's a question that you've been avoiding asking of yourself or somebody else, use today as an opportunity to check in with yourself and think about what you'd like to have happen. So without any further ado, let's wrap today up with a couple of questions. What do you know now about questions, being asked them or asking them? Because also remember, if you're the one that's asking the questions, you might have somebody else going through this process where they have to feel confident to be able to say what they really think and feel. And your reaction or response to it, by the way, may determine whether if you've reacted really badly last time they asked you, that you asked a question and they were completely honest with you, they may be less confident to answer honestly the next time round. So we have a responsibility when we're asking questions to manage our own responses if we want to continue to have really honest and helpful conversations with people. So what do you know now? What difference does knowing that make? I really would appreciate it if you like the video in Facebook, if you hit the subscribe button in YouTube, or you hit my bell to follow me on LinkedIn. And I'd love to know your models. Please share with me below what you know now. Gives myself more time. Be honest and say, I don't know. No one can know everything. Absolutely. And it's such a big thing. I hear it. And it is tough sometimes in the corporate world. I'll be honest with you, because I've heard people, there's a massive fear of, well, if I say that, they'll think I'm negative. If I say that, they might fire me. And then you've got your whole sort of job thing on your shoulders. And it's a huge thing that goes on. But ultimately, finding the courage to speak up and say what you're really thinking often requires you learning, to manage your own emotions and be able to say it without the criticism or the contempt, so that you can be really objective with your responses, which is why working with a coach means you get to practice it in private, refine your question and your answer. And then the next time you ask that question, you can, because it's usually a question, if it's not been answered, will get asked again by other people or yourself. You can develop and practice your responses until you feel ready to present it, and be resourced to hear whatever response you get. So what do you know now, and what difference does knowing that make? I'd really love to. So what difference does it make to you, Loretta, knowing that that you can give yourself more time and being honest and saying you don't know? What difference does knowing that make? What will the impact be for you? And then just to finish, as we normally do at the end of these calls, I want to invite you, given what you know now and what you've heard today, what would you like to have happen? And if you are struggling to know what you want, it's remembering that when we talk about what we don't want or what's not working, our own brain, our own body cannot support us. I often use the metaphor and the story that Leslie Downs used on a TEDx talk. She's a couple counselor, and she said, if you sort of say to your partner, I don't want this and I don't want that, it's a bit like going to the supermarket saying, I don't want butter, I don't want eggs, and I don't want bread. But then expecting the shopkeeper to look down the hundreds and hundreds of items in the aisle and to know what you do want. It's a guessing game, which then becomes frustrating for your own system. If your own system is trying to guess what you need, that's when we get overwhelmed. It's when we get frustration. It's when we get upset, irritable, impatient. Whereas if we get clarity of what we want and we talk about what we want, then our own system, our own brain can start to scan and start noticing when we've got it, when it's working. But also people around us that love us and care for us can help us to make that happen too. So what would you like to have happen? And for that to happen, you need to be like what? Or how do you need to be? What kind of you is that you? And as always, we're going to finish with, what kind of resource or support might you need for you to be like that and for you to get that outcome, for that to happen? What kind of resource and support might you need? Now, in my experience, these are questions that I often forget, even for myself. I'll ask them of my clients. I'll listen to what my clients want. I'll listen to if someone's really upset in my family, I might ask them, how can I best support you right now? Quite often they don't know. But the fact that I've asked them the question, it sows it in the back of their mind. And then a few days later, they might go, actually, what would be really helpful is. And so it's usually the question we ask ourselves the least. And if we don't know what kind of resource or support we need in order to set ourselves up for success and to take brave and courageous action, then we can't even ask it of ourselves or other people. And sometimes all the support we need is someone that will listen without reacting, without getting emotionally upset or distressed by what we've got to say, and just allowing us to get those thoughts out, organize them, do stuff with some of it, ditch some of it, and actually ask for help with other bits of it. And that clarity of what you want can mean that you can work, learn and live at your best with other people. So as always, if you need any support with that, you know where I am, Cheryl Andrews, the Listening Detective. I look forward to seeing you all again this time next week. And we're going to talk, just to wrap up really the key learnings for the last 6 sessions. See you soon.